You're listening to the Skylight Books podcast. We're an independent, general interest bookstore putting great reads in the hands of people in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. Hosted by resident Skylighters, we're here to bring you new and exciting author conversations, group reads, and bookseller chats. Happy listening.
Hello. You are listening to Lit Angeles, a special series podcast from the Skylight Books podcast. I'm Emily VanKoughnett, and I think I got that all right. I'd like to welcome my co-host, who is laughing next to me.
Hi, I'm Alena Saunders, the co-host.
Yay! And we're here to talk to you guys today about our second book in this series that we're doing about LA fiction. Mm-hmm. And as you can guess from the title of this episode, we are talking about LA Woman by the wonderful Eve Babbitt.
Yeah, we loved it.
We loved it. We're going to be upfront. We loved it.
Yeah, spoiler alert, we loved it.
We loved it. And come to find out that, so this is the fourth novel she published, mm-hmm. fifth book she published. Mm-hmm. And it was published in 1982. And yeah, so it's her fourth book, and shockingly, not that, none of her books were very well received, but, this one isn't even now that much talked about, so I'm really excited to get into it, because I thought it was lovely.
Yeah, me too. I was super surprised at how much I liked it, because I had read her essays, since I moved to Los Angeles, so for 10 months. I've been reading her essays, and I thought they were so good and energetic and smart and funny, and I was a little worried to read her fiction, because mm-hmm. I don't know, sometimes writers can write really great essays, and then they get into novel writing, and it's very, self-serious, but, man, this book was so good.
So good. And we wanted to start just by reading what the blurb of the book to you guys.
Oh, yeah.
Because what this book is about, we'll get into it. Let me just read this blurb really quick. Okay, I picked up my copy of the book. It says, a very special reissue of LA Woman, which follows Sophie, a 20-something Jim Morrison groupie, gliding through a golden existence in LA. And Lola, a German immigrant who settles in Hollywood in the 20s as a chauffeur for Pierce Arrow, and who knows that Maybelline mascara cakes and Rudolph Valentino are the essences of life. To Sophie and Lola, Los Angeles, though constantly changing, is essentially eternal. Through their eyes, we see the mixture of high and low culture, the promises of youth, and the fulfillment of nostalgia, the quintessential pink sunsets and the palm trees of the city lights. And through this fantastic tale, Babbitt shares, as only she can, what it is to be a woman in what she convinces us is the capital of civilization.
Yeah.
Alena, do you think that that's what this book is about?
If I had read that before reading this book, I would not want to read this book.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's weird. It seems kind of precious and boring.
It also makes, it doesn't tell you that much about what actually happens in the book. Sure, it's about these characters. It's about Sophie, who's our main narrator.
Yeah.
And it's about Lola, who is at the very beginning of the book, Lola's introduced to us because Sophie doesn't want to go to New York for the summer because New York sucks, and also because she wants to lose her virginity. Yeah. So she convinces her family friend, Lola, to stay for a month with her in LA.
Yeah.
No, that does not give you the flavor of this, relationship.
No, definitely not. I mean, and it also doesn't, to me, this book, the plot is, the least important thing to me in this book, because there's not really even a plot that you could explain to someone. You know what I mean? It's more of a portrait of, what it means to be a young woman, and what it means to be in LA, and what it means to be a young woman growing up in LA.
Yeah, and it's Sophie, who's the main character, but it's basically Eve. It's just these portraits of people in her life, people in her parents' life, and them before they moved to LA.
Yeah.
And then, like, Sophie as she gets older, and it's told in, like, a non-linear way.
Yeah.
Through time and, like, across countries and across the U.S. And it's just like,
yeah.
And it all comes back to LA as the center of the world. Because it's the center of Eve Babbitt's world is LA.
Yeah.
But it's like so much more than this like kind of like pink pastel-y, like simple,
like cutesy
version of LA, which like
fair enough, because if I had to write the blurb of this book, I would have no idea how to actually write it and get people to read it, except for being like, this is a portrait and it's really good and you should just read it.
And you should read it. So exactly. So we'll move on from the blurb, but so why I think so like it's a book about this girl and the people she knows.
Yeah. And the city she
lives in. And her escapades. So why did we pick this book?
Yeah, why did we pick this book over somebody like maybe Joan Didion, or you know, anyone else?
Anyone else? I mean, those two are like constantly in conversation with each other.
That's the thing. It's like that's what's really interesting is like, you know, we kind of have in our minds two female LA writers from that time period, and it's
Didion and Babbitt, and they died in the same week. Like, can you fucking believe it?
No, I know, and it, you know, and from like, because I'm not from LA, I never wanted to move to LA, and I didn't discover Eve Babbitt until I moved to LA.
Yeah.
So like for me, the woman who writes about LA or like the West Coast in general was Joan Didion. But I'm glad that we decided to do Eve Babbitt's because I think she's like very LA.
Yeah.
And also like she has a way of kind of encapsulating or like being able to acknowledge both the good and the bad parts of LA, but especially the good, because I feel like a lot of people who write about LA are often writing kind of darker, like about LA's darker themes, whereas Babbitt seems to kind of acknowledge those, but also find a bit of humor or lightness in them, which is really interesting. And I think, so why do you think we chose this book?
I mean, I think we're like a little bit like Didion overdone, right? Like little not talked about or talked about enough.
Yeah, and I love Joan Didion.
For the record, we know legend. But you know, Eve Babbitt was a true LA girl. She writes so much in this book and in all her books about like growing up in the Hollywood Hills. Going to her like first story that got printed was about Hollywood High, and it's like she writes about these true LA things, and so I think she comes from such a place of love with it. I always tell people when they're like, "Why do you live here?" Which is always the question people ask when people.
What I always ask people.
And I'm like, and I think in the same way that like I think Eve Babbitt would even say, or like, it's like I'm always like, there's gonna be traffic, there's gonna be an earthquake, there's gonna be
fires,
there's gonna be shallow people who are here to get famous, but like, there's so much more to it, and I think Eve Babbitt captures all of that. And a huge thing that's interesting about Eve Babbitt's writing is like that she is in the culture. It's like, not to bring up Kerouac or men, but like it's like beatniky and punk and cool in the way that it like she writes very much in the scene that she's living in, and even though it's quote unquote fiction, it's really like this portrait of this scene, and it's so alive, and like, you know, she's just like writing from like not like a base place, but like a place of feelings, like of like
and also I mean like she is kind of like, you know, Joan Didion is of that generation of like gonzo journalism, like that kind of stuff, but you don't often see women writing in the same way that like you know, Michael Hare was writing, or who's that other guy, Hunter S. Thompson was writing. Exactly. You know, like you don't see that kind of full not even acceptance, but like that full idea that like women writers are full humans, like that we don't have to be hyper intellectual to be taken seriously as writers. And I think Eve Babbitt was like, obviously from her writing, a hyper intellectual, but like was also very willing to engage in kind of lower brow things and like really explore what it means to be fully human, you know. And yeah, so I think, yeah.
And I think, yeah, so like within the book, an example of that is kind of like her relationship with the men in her life.
Yeah.
And so she like famously has dated tons of men, all the men. If there was a man, she was dating.
If there was a man around, she was dating.
But like never with, she's so clear in this book about how it's like never with the intention of like commitment or marriage or like that being a thing on her radar at all.
Yeah.
Like it's just...
It's like that Cher quote. It's like, men are dessert, you know?
Yeah, she's just like, this is fun, and like,
This is like, additive.
Yeah, exactly, and like, she really seems to love the chase and like... Yeah. To be adored, but I'm so fascinated by the portrait that she has in this book, too, of just like, you know, like, a huge fascination in this book is like, her talking about like, what she wants out of life, and like it's like set around the time where the character Sophie is graduating from high school, and everyone's like, what do you want out of life? And she's like, I just want to entertain. I just want to entertain, and I want to do nothing. I want to put on my string bikini, and I want to go to the beach.
Yes.
And like, I just love that portrait of like, you know, if this is parallel to Eve, then like that's who she was, and like she is out here dating Jim Morrison without a fucking care in the world. Yeah. She's dating Ed Ruscha and his brother without a care in the world. Like, LA greats who are, like, lauded, and she's, like, you know, having fun and then taking her art really seriously at the same time.
It's, like,
and I
truly
think that's
radical.
where it's, like, I think so often about how people probably think that this is just, like men are geniuses and women are just like beautiful by existing, and like I think I don't know, people could read this book and just think that like Eve Babbitt isn't talented because she's just writing about herself and what she did, and not see like the genius in her work because she's able to look effortless and cool doing it. And like that doesn't take work.
No, I know, and that's the thing about this book is like the writing seems so effortless and so like it's just like so unmistakably her voice. And me and Emily were talking before about like, I was saying, I wonder what Eve's editing process was, because like that's the nature of this book where it just feels like so off the cuff, and that makes it so energetic and entertaining, and like not a word is like every word is in its place and every word is useful, or like, I mean, it's just very concise and very energetic.
Like,
and
like,
the
words are like stylistic. Like they're like not words you would ever.
Yeah, you wouldn't put those words together naturally. You know what I mean? But also like to what you were saying, it's. I find like I forget sometimes that at that time period that, you know, when Eve Babbitt was growing up, like it must have been a truly radical thing to be like, yeah, I don't want to get married, or I don't have any real like need to get married. I don't, you know, like to just kind of exist in like a state of looking for pleasure, like an enjoyment out of life. I feel like for a woman at that time, that must have been like a fairly radical way to live your life, you know?
And like, like thank God she was in LA, you know, like, and I think it's fascinating too, because like the women in her life go through divorces, go through many men, like they're not without, like they're also pursuing these men, but like, like one of her friends is like, I got married because I didn't know what else to do.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's a really, I mean,
And that,
lost in thought.
In that sense, I guess one question we had been dancing around is like, what makes an LA woman?
Yeah, this is actually such a interesting, funny question, and you know, I didn't like for my whole life. I basically like I grew up until I was 19 in Syracuse, New York. And then since then, I've kind of been moving around almost constantly, and I'm 31 now. So, like, a bulk of that time, like 6 or 7 years was spent in Chicago. But since, you know, all the other years there, I've been kind of, like, moving around to different places. And reading this book was kind of the first time that I was like, fuck, I should have, like, been somewhere. Like, I should have just picked a place and landed there and, like, really understood it. Because I have very surface level kind of understandings of places that I've lived. But, like, the way that Eve Babbitt wrote this book, you can tell that she has a real, like, feeling understanding of LA, you know, like a very visceral understanding of what LA is.
And, like, how to operate and navigate it, like, in a way that I think takes years
so
of,
many
like,
years
to, like, understand that you can be whatever. Like, I mean, plenty of people move here with the, like, express intention of being like, I'm going to be who I want to be.
Yeah.
But I think to, like, be born into that is a different thing.
Yeah.
And also, the stakes for her were so much lower. Like, she didn't want to make it to be famous. Like, or at least Sophie doesn't want to make it to be famous.
Yeah.
It's just, like, about kind of making art and being adjacent. And granted, this was written in a time where you could make art here and live here.
Afford to live here.
Like, that's not the reality anymore. But I think there's, like, I think what, like, the LA woman ends up being is, like, this mixture between artist and, like, con artist and, like, beauty.
I like that, yeah.
Where it's, like, you know, you're, like, or, like, at least, like, shapeshifter. Like, you're elusive and you're a muse, but you're also your own independent person. And I think she really captures that. And, like, you're also, like, in the know and on the scene and, like, hot and smart and I don't know. I mean, maybe that's just Eve Babbitt's this, like, LA woman.
No,
but, like,
I get
it's
that. Like, even with Chandler, you kind
Yeah.
of see that same kind of elusive, like a little bit mysterious kind of woman character emerge. And, like, you can kind of see the echoes of that in the way that Eve Babbitt's, or, like, you know, Sophie acts. And I don't know that you really see that kind of, like, sly type in any other city genre. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like, that's not like the New York woman. The New York woman is out on the town,
power
and, like, strutting, getting
and, like,
a job,
and like, whereas that's really funny.
Like, it's really not that. And then, like, it's not just Sophie in the book, it's, like, also this character Lola, who we mentioned in the blurb, who is, like, a family friend and, like, the older version of Sophie, and she really gets validation from her of, like, what this life could be like for her. And she's like, there's this really great part where Sophie's working as, like, she's working at a movie theater and she's just handing out tickets. She's like, I love the colors and I love how they're rolled up in these little rolls that look like film. And I just love that, like, and she's like, and I look beautiful in my little glass box and people love to watch me.
Yeah, and she's like, it's a neighborhood theater where the neighbors are Jack Nicholson and, like, whoever else.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
and,
really
like,
wonderful.
Lola comes to visit her, and she's like, Lola's the only person who understands the magic and, like, potential of this job. Yeah. And I was like, I love that, like, that there's somebody else who can, like, see that, like, this is, like, a stage for her to be on.
Yeah.
Not that she wants to be in the movies, but, like, she just wants to be seen as this, like, embodiment of these things she's so interested in portraying. It's like, it is performance art in a way. This is performance art sitting in this glass box, like coyly shaping her bangs in a certain way.
Honestly, that's how I feel when I'm working.
I mean, we work at a bookstore. Come see how we do it.
Yeah. Just, like, you know, try to act as French as possible. Just, like,
all the time.
Just reading a book.
I'm just reading a book. But I love that. And it's, like, so clear that, like, Marilyn Monroe was such an influence on that as well.
And, like, that's the other thing that I think, like, this idea of, like, what is an LA woman? I mean, I feel like, and this again is kind of an echo from the Chandler thing, but, like, there's something about LA where, like, people come here to pursue greatness in whatever kind of artistic medium they want to. And then there's also like this extremely weird proximity to like the world that you're trying to tap into. Like you can go to any cafe here and you'll most likely see like some like ultra famous celebrity just like having a croissant or whatever. And having that kind of proximity is really weird, and somehow that taps like, and like you see that in this book where there's like a lot of like Jim Morrison and all that stuff. Like there's a lot of kind of dipping the toe in and out of that world.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a lot of kind of like brief glimpses that Sophie has into this kind of more like artistic, like not high art, but like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
and she's like, in the way that like what happens, I think, when you live here is like you start to realize like how bizarre celebrity is, and then also how like so like they're just people, and so all these men that she dates, these people that she knows who are famous, she is almost like mean about them.
Yeah.
Like Jim Morrison is just like a drunk on his way to death in this.
Yeah.
Like, which I mean, fair.
Yeah.
But like, she's like unabashed kind of in like her portrait of men throughout her writing, like the men that she's loved that are famous.
Yeah.
I think she like truly, paints them as real people, which is funny why the groupie thing that she gives herself, that she calls herself a groupie, is funny because I'm like, it creates a divide between her and these men that she's with, and it's like, you're on the same level, and power dynamics, like, of gender aside, like, there is something to be said about, like, her ability to be so witty that, like, these great men let her, like, let her write about them like this. And, yeah. And I think it's just very interesting that it's, like, she's able to, like, take down celebrity, but also, like, celebrate it. It makes it very, like...
Yeah, not even, like, take down, but just be, like, very candid about it. And, like, very blunt about, like, the humanity of the people who we kind of idolize.
Yeah, and it's just, like... Yeah. And it's, like, in the book also, like, her dad is a musician, and her parents are from this, like, whole era of, like, Trotskyite, like... artists, and like I guess in real life her dad like did a lot of stuff, music, like played a lot of violin in the movies and stuff, so like he did the like had like a gig where he did like studio musician stuff for movies, and so he did the violins on like in The Shining when they pull back, or no, in Psycho when they pull back the curtain.
Oh my god.
He does like the violin on that.
Yeah,
and so it's like the that's him. That's
wow, that's wild.
His name's not Mort in real life, but it's Mort in the book. But like so he did that, and so it's like these funny things where it's like, I think if you are a real LA woman and an LA native, you like have a lifetime of like touching.
Yeah, exactly.
Greatness.
Yeah, which makes
quote unquote greatness.
Yeah, quote unquote greatness. Like, which makes you kind of like ambivalent towards it, I'm sure. Or just like, or maybe even willing, like less attached to it than somebody coming from the outside who's like, I need to network and meet all these people. Whereas like if you've lived here long enough, you're kind of like, yeah, this kind of flows in and out. Like sometimes I touch it and sometimes I don't. Yeah. It just feels like a weird sentence to say.
Yeah, but it's like, yeah, she spends so much, oh my god, the bar that they go to all the time in this, Barney's Beanery.
Yeah.
Was like one of the first bars I went to when I moved to LA, and which is so funny now because it's like a chain. Like it's a...
Is it?
Yeah, there's one at the airport.
Oh.
Like it's like... I'm pretty sure, don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure. But like there's like
LAX for the
but
Barney's
I
Beanery.
think there is one there, but like it's kind of like faux dive bar now, but like at the time of this it was like and this is also when West Hollywood was hot,
and that's like something I feel like a detail that I feel like Eve Babbitts would really like, that there's now one at the airport. I think so.
Oh god, I'm gonna have to Google this immediately.
I know,
I'm pretty sure, guys.
Fake news, sorry.
So why do you think that Eve Babbitts had this resurgence, which is like one of the reasons we picked this, but like why do you think?
Well,
people wanted to bring her back.
Lily Analik wrote that book, and I think that was kind of one of the...
Hollywood's Eve.
Hollywood's Eve, yes. And I think that was kind of one of the major reasons that there was kind of there's been a real resurgence. I mean, like, people buy the shit out of this book. Not this book, but Eve
all
Babbitt's,
of the books.
Yeah, in general. I mean, I'm not sure if that's like an LA thing or if it's a nationwide thing that there was a resurgence. I
think just like also just that, like, why do you think people wanted to like reprint her since it was out of print? Why do you think it came back into print?
Man, because the writing is just so fucking good. Like the writing is just, it's unreal. It's like so energetic and so concise. And it is so, like, I think right now there's a lot of, I mean, I think always, but I think there's a lot of writing that you read it and you wouldn't be able to tell what author wrote it, you know? Like, there's not a lot of style. Not to be insulting, but, like, there's not a lot of emphasis put on, like, this is hard to articulate.
Well, okay,
but
so there's one book that we both agree wasn't the smash hit that maybe we thought it would be, and based on how much it sells, it isn't. And I think it is. I'm not going to name it.
No.
What if this poor author listens to this? They wouldn't. They're too busy. But like, it's a novel that appears to have a lot of plot, but actually has no plot, and it's about nothing.
No stakes.
But yet, the stakes are high, but they're imagined. And so it's
exactly. So they're not really stakes.
Really stakes. And so, like, even though this specific book has not much plot, and I think a lot of her books probably don't have much plot aside from, like...
Not a through line kind of plot.
Besides, like, partying.
Or, like, it's almost
gossipy, like, whatever.
Anecdotes that kind of fit together and make sense
But
together.
In general, like, novels these days, and I feel fine saying this because I work at a bookstore and I know what's coming out. There are a lot of, like, interior dramas. Like, it's fighting with the self.
Yeah.
And I just think that Eve Babbitt's, like, cuts through that noise for me.
With Eve Babbitt, she's kind of one of those writers that I could read her writing about literally anything and be entertained because she's so smart that, you know, she makes everything interesting, you know? Yeah. Okay, here's why I think people are appreciating Eve Babbitt's right now is because her style, like her writing is super accessible, but also like she's an amazing stylist, like in terms of her sentences and the way that she writes. And I think that there's kind of not much of that happening in the literary world right now. I mean, maybe that's not true actually, but like from what I've read of more recent novels, you could kind of put one down, pick another one up, and assume it's by the same author because the style is so like consistent and clear, but maybe not necessarily exciting prose. So like, but like with Eve Babbitt's, like, you know, her prose is so exciting and it's so concise and it's got so much energy behind it, and also so much kind of like joy and like love and curiosity and interest about the world that she's describing, you know? And I think people, especially after this like shit fucking 2 years, whatever, however 8 billion years of quarantine and just people kind of being pretty bored and also a little bit worried and scared and depressed, like this kind of energy of like, yeah, the world is kind of difficult and it's scary, but like, look at how funny this actually can be. And look at how many weird things happen. I think people like that energy right now.
And I think also, like when she was originally getting republished, it was like maybe a little bit Me Too era. At least it was like early 2010. So there was like the sudden idea that men were bad. Sudden. Yeah. Out of nowhere. Who knew?
What?
But like, that like, and so I think there was like a hunger to discover, like kind of like what we were saying before is like, it's like not to mention Hunter S. Thompson and not to mention these men like Jack Kerouac, where it's like maybe we're kind of tired of men who wrote in those styles, but still want that same style.
Yeah.
And, like, she presents that style in a way that's like, oh my god, wait, women were writing in that era. And, like, guess what? We forgot about them.
Yeah.
And stopped publishing their work.
Yeah, well, it's almost like people want to see the other side of the same coin, you know? Like, I love the writing of, like, gonzo journalists and, like, you know, the kind of new journalism thing. But I also want to hear the other side of it, you know? Like, I want to see myself in there.
And it's like, why couldn't a woman be doing this? Like, obviously a woman wouldn't do it in the same way a man would, but, like, in what way is she doing it is very compelling. And, like, it's just so amazing to see, again, like, her inserted into this cast of characters that we know.
Totally. And I think it's also so important to see, like, I mean, and this is kind of obvious and kind of like a point that's been made over and over, but when it hits, like, the idea that you see the way that you might want to write, but also that, like, your experiences are important, even if they seem kind of like, you know, cast aside as like women's issues, like, you know, dating, which, like, I find to be one of the more fascinating things to talk about, because, like, what could be more important or, like, more interesting than, like, the attempt to find a partner who you're going to spend the rest of your fucking life with? Like, not much is more interesting, I think, than that, but it is always cast aside as, like, some sort of, like, oh, silly women things, and men have more important things to do, like go to war, and, I mean, you know, and
go
whatever else they do.
Go do drugs with their buddies.
And go do drugs, and, you know, find, exactly. Like find not someone to love, but someone to sleep with that night. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's like, so that, anyways.
I think it's interesting. Men. No, I just think it's interesting, and it's cool to see that, like, somebody can write so elegantly about things that in a lot of the, like, patriarchal culture are cast aside as, like, very lowbrow and very unintellectual.
Yeah, and I was listening to this interview with Lily Analik, who wrote the biography, Hollywood's Eve. I have to think about that one and not say Eve's Hollywood.
I know, me too.
It's just time. Like, but she's talking about how she's like, with everything, it's like what we can identify as happening right now in this moment. Yeah. So, like, you know, like the bad shit that's happening right now in this moment, and we're all, like, you know, on one plane understanding that. Like, right now, we're recording this in May. It's like, yeah, we all know that, like, the Roe v. Wade thing is happening. Lord. Ukraine is happening. Sorry to bring that into the mix. But then underneath that all, there's, like, another conversation to be had, and that's, like, where the interesting stuff is. And her argument is that, like, Eve Babbitt's can, like, cut to that. Like, with her sweetness, like, with her sensuality, with, like, her, not sweetness, but, like, her romanticism, and, like...
And kind of her levity.
Her happiness. It's like, we are in really dark times, and when these were getting republished, it was early 2010s, I don't think it's quit. No. And so, like... Yeah, like, to be able to undercut all of that and find, like, the layer underneath that, I think is a really powerful tool.
Yeah, it's what we need more. I mean, it's like that. I mean, this is why, like, people like reading. Yeah. You know, and this is why, like, writers enjoy writing. Is like you're taking something that could be completely surface, or it could be made to look surface, and going a little bit deeper and having a little bit more of a nuanced and interesting conversation about certain things. Yeah, it's bleak.
Do you want to share one of your favorite quotes from the book? Okay,
so this is the first paragraph that I was like, oh, this is an amazingly well-written book. So it's about, it's Sophie talking about her cousin Ophelia, who had just changed her name to Ophelia from Andrea. Okay, so here we go. And Ophelia, when her mother married Tim and she found herself at the age of 12 moving to Watts, changed her name from Andrea, which it had been so far, making herself the character whose youth was sacrificed because some idiot couldn't act nice. It's just so good.
It's just so good.
I always love when they kind of, you know, authors who are so accessible kind of weave in, like, either stuff from Shakespeare or Greek myth or whatever.
Yeah, and it's like...
so nice.
And then I think it's like you see, again, the echo of the LA woman in this other woman that we don't even get to delve too deep into in the book. But, like, you see these other, like, LA natives that Sophie knows, like, throwing themselves into these identities also and, like, pursuing this life.
Yes, yeah, totally. Okay, wait, what's yours? I'm curious.
So I had this one marked on my post-it as Hollywood. But it's from the perspective of Lola, who is, again, her family friend, who's a generation ahead of her, talking about, like, early days Hollywood, when there was far much stuff here, and when, like, the mountains, she would, like, climb every day in the mountains.
Right, yeah,
and she would, like, walk across the mountains. Yeah. Which is crazy to think now. I don't know how you would do that.
No.
Okay, so she's, like, walking home from dance rehearsal. She said, that morning when she got to the top of Mount Hollywood, she paused for 2 minutes to watch the way the sun stretched out in the east and made a clear yellow line on the bottom. LA's horizons could be so flattened sometimes due to nothing in the distance but low hills, like Mount Hollywood itself. There is, of course, no tree, bush, or flower called Hollywood any place on Earth. And in fact, the only two kinds of things which actually grow indigenous to Hollywood at all are either black oaks or brush, a kind of chaparral, which in September, as Lola breathed in the smell, smelled only of dryness about to go up in flames, but at least not of garlic.
Oh, yeah, I remember this one. It's so good.
Because, like, the dude she's sleeping with always smells like garlic. And she's like, at least he drinks, like, some weird parsley tea before we sleep together.
Yeah.
And that's, like, to cut the garlic.
But also that line smelled only of dryness about to go up in flames. Like,
yes.
That's what I'm talking about, where it's so specific and weird, but also so, like, you know exactly what that is when you hear that. You know exactly what feeling, like, and it's not just a smell, it's like, you know, the whole feeling, of being in that environment.
And that reminds me of a line that our guest for today's podcast wrote in her introduction to Eve Babbitt's essay collection, I Used to Be Charming, and the introduction is from our guest, Molly Lambert. Ooh. And she talks about this willingness, that, like, when you move to LA, you're, like, ready to be on fire at any time, which, is, in fact, what happened to Eve Babbitt's.
Yes.
She lit herself on fire.
Yeah, that's what outsiders do.
So now we will take a short break, and then introduce our next character. Our next guest, Molly Lambert. Stay tuned, folks. And we're back. We have Molly Lambert here with us. Molly Lambert is the creator and host of the podcast Heidi World, The Heidi Fleiss Story, and The Secret History of LA, out now on iHeartRadio podcasts. Welcome, Molly.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah. I guess we had talked about you a little bit previously, and had already also said that you wrote such a fantastic introduction into Eve Babbitt's essay collection, I Used to Be Charming. Because we were just talking about fires, so which is very relevant within that book, of course.
I mean, I'm always really curious. I wanted to know, like, what your journey into writing was. Like, when did you know you wanted to be a writer?
Sure.
How did that come about?
Pretty early, probably. I think I just was like, ooh, that would be more fun than having a real job. And, you know, yes and no to that.
Yeah. How did you find your way into being an Eve Babbitt's fan?
Well, I actually, it was a friend of mine put sort of some of her stuff into reprint because it was all out of print when I first heard of her, before the New York Review of Books started putting stuff back into print. But I believe it was Emily Books, which is Emily Gould's kind of like book service, her and this woman Ruth, and she had kind of said to me, like, oh, you would love, you know, you should check out Eve Babbitt's, like, she writes about LA, she's this cool countercultural female writer from LA, and I had never heard of her. So that was the first time I read her was when they reissued, I think, Eve's Hollywood for an online book club. And then it sort of took off from there. I think just people started talking about her again. I was just sort of like, who is this person? Where did they come from? Why have I never heard of them before? And it was because they were out of print. And, but I think I had sort of always been like, where are the hedonistic countercultural female writers, and I'd always loved sort of, gonzo journalism and male 60s counterculture writers. So yeah, finding out that there was a female countercultural writer who was so cool, because obviously there's Joan Didion, but Joan Didion is very kind of uptight and not interested in like her own pleasure is not anything I would ever say about her. So, to read Eve for the first time, who's all just about kind of like having fun, was revelatory.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's funny. I moved here like 10 months ago, and working at the bookstore is the first time I saw Eve Babbitt's. I don't even remember why I was like, oh, this is amazing, or like decided to pick it up. But I felt like such a failure because I had never heard of her before. And I too like love kind of the 60s, 70s era of writing, and just like the immense amount of like stylistic talent that came out of that era is pretty amazing. So I felt like, wow, how had I not heard of her? And then to now like be reading this book and find out that like a lot of her stuff was not really in print or in circulation for a long time was pretty mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, and just to realize that, people fall out of print, and that's how we stop, they stop getting read. And now, at this point, I feel like everybody in LA is very aware of Eve Babbitt's, especially because she passed away recently. Mm-hmm. But it's been a pretty amazing, because it's really only happened in the past, 10 years or something that she's gotten back into print. And it rules, because it was hard to find her stuff before.
Yeah. And I feel like so very validated by her writing in the way that like my fascination with being a party girl and like all the time that I was like, wow, this partying is like so very romantic in a sense. And like this, yeah, again, like pleasure and hedonism is fascinating. But, we were only told those stories through like the male lens, and like to see her doing that is really great. And I like have definitely since found other female writers doing the same thing, but I think just to kind of find that again now, I was just so struck by like how smart she is, and I was like, yeah, this reminds me of people who I actually know and like have seen out in LA, and it feels very real in a way.
Yeah, also, and I think the way in which sort of like a lot of male writing is party reporting, but I do think with like female writers sometimes there's this kind of like frivolity associated with especially party reporting, but it's like that's where all the stuff happens. So I get mad when people just call Eve Babbitt's like a party girl, because it's like, well, yeah, but like most party girls aren't paying attention and cataloging everything that's happening the whole time, and then going home and remembering to write about it. So
yeah, that must have been such a dedicated practice on her end, like the ability to capture all of it while it was
to sort of, I know, because I imagine she wasn't like going out with a notepad, but just coming home and sort of like spilling it all out.
Yeah, she must have been like so just so sharp to like be fucked up and retaining things, and also like having a writing practice. It's like incredible.
Yeah.
And I also like, I mean, it's funny because like Joan Didion, as you said, is like kind of like, we were talking about this earlier about how, Eve Babbitt's and Joan Didion in my mind now are kind of like the two female writers of that generation. But Joan Didion's was kind of much more removed. Like her writing is much more removed, much more kind of like,
Well, Joan Didion's also from Sacramento.
Yeah,
She's
exactly.
not an LA
So she's not
girl.
like hard.
She's not really an LA girl. She's a Goldwater girl.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
she comes from this Republican family, this rich family from Sacramento. So, you know, the fact that she was always kind of cited as like the LA writer never really fully sat right with me, you know. But then you find out that she and Eve were friends, and that the reason Eve started writing really was sort of to counteract what Joan Didion was saying, to say, you know, it's not all apocalypse. You know, it's not all just like terrible things happen here and the earth swallows everybody, you know.
I mean, that's not why we're here, right? Like, if it was all just like, of course there's the promise that will happen, but like there's like glitz and glam and that certain something that is LA in between all of that.
Yeah, exactly. And sort of, you know, that obviously that also exists. It's not apocalyptic here, but you know, that sort of fire and brimstone stuff that you get in the White Album from Joan Didion, you know, I think Eve Babbitt's really felt a responsibility as an LA person to say, okay, but also it's just a place. It's also just a normal city where normal people are from, and if you're from here, then it's not the same as the sort of like symbolic idea of LA and of Hollywood that, you know, transplants have.
Yeah, totally. And we were talking about that too, in terms of like how Eve Babbitt is able to capture the whole experience of living in LA, like attending jury duty in LA or whatever, like that there's a complete normalcy. And I also like appreciate that about her obsession with Las Vegas also, where it's like, I lived in Las Vegas for a little bit and I was like, man, I love living like a normal person in Las Vegas. And then I just get to go to the Strip sometimes. Like, this is so bizarre, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think any place like Las Vegas or LA or these places that have such a mythology, you know, and people project a lot onto them, but then, yeah, they're also just places. And if you live in Las Vegas, it's just where you live. It's not like
you gotta
Sodom
go
and
to
Gomorrah.
The doctor at some point. Like,
yeah, exactly.
You still gotta go to the grocery store. Like, there's like something normal to all of it. A question.
And I love like the mundanity of like going to the grocery store in Las Vegas is the best.
Yeah. A question that we asked ourselves earlier that we also want to ask you was, what is an LA woman then? Like, what is this idea of the LA girl that Eve is trying to capture?
I mean, I think it's like a cool woman, you know, who is sort of like, it's all very West Coast to me. It's like somebody who's very laid back, who's not uptight, who, you know, is sort of aware that the earth is going to swallow everybody and, you know, lives in the moment. And doesn't have this kind of lineage of the type of striving that, you know, maybe more European influenced cities have, more Eastern cities. You know, what I love about LA is this idea that you can kind of make it up, be whoever you want, and have a kind of like privacy if you want it, you know, that you can go around LA and not run into anybody if you want to. There's this kind of anonymity that really freaks people out if they're not from here and they don't like it necessarily. If they're used to, you know, being the center of everything, then it's like LA can be very alienating, because it's about sort of like there is no center, no person is the center. There's no tall buildings to orient yourselves around. It's very, I have a theory about just kind of like that the landscape is feminine because it's, you know, hills and canyons and valleys and things. It's not oriented around skyscrapers and you know, phallic buildings.
Erect,
kind of like
erect buildings. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like these feminine, you know, hilly, kind of unknowable landscapes. But yeah, I mean, I think it's also, you know, that can add to the kind of apocalyptic feeling if you are feeling alienated. But I run into people all the time. Like my friend Alex says I live in Larry David's LA because I constantly run into people on the street. And I just think it's like, yeah, if you're here long enough, you will meet everybody and learn that there's just like 10 people in town really. And especially I feel like bookstores, I feel like places like Skylight are just like a big sort of hub for like, yeah, there's community here. But you do have to kind of seek it out more. It doesn't really reveal itself to you. You have to go out and find it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's absolutely true. But I also work in public, so I see people all the time, whether I want to or not.
Yeah, it's been a really weird experience, living here for me, especially like because I hate driving and it really freaks my shit out. Like I just don't do it if I don't have to. So I spend most of my time just like walking around the neighborhood in which I live, and it occurred to me like how small LA can feel, like much smaller than when I lived in New York, obviously, and Chicago. But like that sense of community I feel is really strong here, which is the opposite of what I had expected in LA, because there seems to be much movement here, people moving here, people leaving, it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think with writers too, it's like because it's like different. It's different than the kind of East Coast competitive literary world. It's like obviously there's competitive writers here, but I feel like they mostly are in TV and film. Mm-hmm. So people who want to write fiction and essays and stuff like that, it is like a very small kind of tight-knit community where I feel like people are kind of supportive of each other because it's like, well, we all, acknowledge that like the LA literary scene is kind of this like this friend group.
Yeah. And that's like, I mean, the reason why we wanted to start like this podcast, we're basically like reading a bunch of like famous LA novels, right? And because like LA isn't seen as a literary city where it's like, but there's so many people here writing and making art, and like why isn't it being acknowledged as a literary city? And like,
yeah, I think it's because people are dumb and they can't conceptualize of something being like beautiful and smart at the same time, I think it's like either it's like it's ugly and intelligent, or it's like beautiful and stupid. And LA is very beautiful, and so people think it's like a place for stupid people. But everywhere is a place for stupid people, and everywhere is a place for smart people. It's not like there's more smart people or dumb people here. And I think people from other places, sometimes it's like they do a lot of comparing of like, well, this, my city is different from LA in this way. And but it's not that different. It's just a place.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I do think it's like, I definitely think its reputation as a literary city has been on the rise for a while now. I think some of the things Eve talks about of just that, like, the idea that LA is a cultural wasteland is like ridiculous. It's like was coming from people who were just like, well, where's the Broadway theater scene? It's like, well, we have different stuff,
Yeah.
We have like a culture of mariachi bands, and like that counts just as much as like a symphony,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think kind of to say that people who say LA has no culture, it's just like they haven't spent any time in LA, or they haven't left their hotel, because it's like, of course you can come here and just stay in a place where all you see is aspiring actors, it's like that is available too, which I think Eve also acknowledges a lot, is like, if you want to see the cliches, they're there, you can find them, but that's not all there is, and that's kind of like, ironically, people who think LA is a superficial place tend to have an incredibly superficial read on it,
Mm-hmm. And I think to like do that, you would have to have your blinders on to like everything else around you. Like while it's a sprawling city, like it's still a massive city where people are on top of each other, and like people of all cultures and backgrounds are like next to each other all the time. So I think you'd have to be like uber focused on yourself, and
you'd have to want to see just what you wanted to see, you know.
Exactly.
And that does happen, obviously. But you know, again, I think at this point it's almost flipped too much, where people come here and think they discovered all, you know, that it's cool. That they're like, did you know that LA actually has like lots of great restaurants and cool people and stuff? And it's like, yeah, we did know, and we didn't need the New York Times to like admit it finally.
right.
You know, for that to be true. Like, we didn't need the New York Times to be like, did you know they have bagels there? You know, because again, it's very like, it's not a real city until it's exactly like New York. And it's like, well, that's not true. And, you know, cities come in all shapes and sizes. And I think places like LA and Las Vegas, and, you know, I'm also interested in, like, my friend Sarah's from Dallas, and I love hearing her talk about Dallas. You know, it's like, I think cities that were designed around cars are a different type of city. And I don't think they're worse necessarily. Obviously, car culture is bad for a lot of reasons, and, you know, infrastructure. We also, you know, we have public transportation here. It's just takes longer to use. Yeah, but we don't not have public transportation. We don't, you know, I know lots of people who walk everywhere here, and it's totally possible to live in LA as like a walkable city. But, you know, I think with everything, it's just like, and again, it kind of relates back to like the idea of gender difference. It's like, it's just different. It's not better or worse. It's just different, you know? Mm-hmm. It's just not the same as like, you know, Frankfurt or whatever, you know, London, like cities that, you know, East Coast cities are kind of patterned after. It's like, no, this is a different landscape, and the hills very much inform sort of like the lack of center, you know, and I think it's cool personally.
I think it's really interesting in terms of like you saying that the city is feminine, and then also like the comparisons to cities like Las Vegas and Dallas, like that, like maybe all these cities are perceived as being part of low culture, which like obviously you write so much about low culture. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on like representing low culture in writing, and like where, like you also focus on that so much in your podcast that you're working on now, and like what do you think is the thing there? Like what's there that's so interesting?
Oh, I mean, I think it's just like the high and low go together. And, you know, I think what I've learned from doing Heidi World, which has been just like super fun for me as like an excavation of this time period in LA, yeah, is that a lot happens at parties. A lot of party girls see like all the real, you know, transitions of power and how power works behind closed doors, and that, you know, things that get kind of dismissed as like feminine or feminized writing. A lot of it is because it's like men don't want people to know like who's cheating on their wife and who, you know, is secretly an alcoholic, and all that kind of Mad Men stuff of just like, you know, appearances and presenting their image. And so I feel like Eve's writing is also just this kind of attempt to like assert yourself and be like, I matter too, you know? Maybe the men aren't writing about me being at this party, but like I'm also at this party, and I'm going to talk about what it's like to be me there. And I think she does an incredible job also of kind of taking the piss out of sort of pompous men, you know, and what we now call clout chasing, because she's someone who knew everybody, and who, you know, was sort of in the way that LA people are. Like, you aren't impressed by show business because it's kind of like, it's not cool to be starstruck, or you know, people from other places are much more like, wow, look, it's Al Pacino over there. And LA people will, you know, also be excited to see Al Pacino, but are much more like, oh yeah, we pretend we don't care. And so I think the fact that she can kind of write about being in this scene in a way that's like not name droppy and annoying. It's not like just Warholian, like, you know, this famous person was here and this famous person was here. It's about power and how power works, and especially about how male power is related to sex and you know, sort of this double elevation of women's sexuality and denigration of it. And so, you know, I think Eve is this kind of hot girl who was able to get in places, but, you know, she also was writing herself into existence as this kind of hot girl, which I also think I related to, is this idea of like, well, no one's giving me the attention that I feel like I want or deserve, you know, so I'm gonna like sort of create myself out of nothing, which is very LA to me too, is I feel like there's this lineage of kind of self-invention of, you know, Marilyn Monroe is from LA, you know, that you can kind of, even if you are from here, the sort of wanting to be like, okay, I'm going to make up the ideal big projected version of me that I want people to see, is very tempting.
Yeah. I was thinking about that concept of reinvention in relationship to the Eve Babbitt's quote that you use at the beginning of the like the intro to the essay collection, the one that says, and because we were in Southern California and Hollywood even, there was no history for us. There were no books or traditions telling us how we could turn out or what anything meant. And I was really interested in terms of like, yeah, this is a city of reinvention, and if you're constantly reinventing yourself, how do you have a sense of history? And then I was thinking about that in terms of relationship to your work and your podcast and like your other podcast as well, and this like art kind of archiving LA histories and like very stories.
I mean, I think it's with LA stuff like this, like Eve Babbitt's and like the Heidi Fleiss story, it is like you kind of have to keep bringing it back up, because I do think there is, because of the landscape and because of fires and earthquakes and stuff like that, and also because LA has a long history of like racism and fascism and, you know, I think there's a lot of effort to erase history in LA. And something that really stuck with me was somebody who had just moved to LA said, why aren't there any statues, or why isn't there anything to commemorate the LA riots? Why isn't there like a sculpture or a plaque or anything to say, you know, this is where the LA riots happened and here's what happened? And I said, well, because they want people to forget. They don't want anyone to remember that happened and that the people of Los Angeles were able to, you know, kind of rise up against the status quo and reject the fascism and the racism of the LAPD and of the people in charge. Because I think, that periodically happens in Los Angeles, happened in, you know, the Watts uprisings and then the 92 uprisings, and then in 2020 with the, you know, the BLM protests. I think, you know, LA is like Disneyland, where there's this kind of false sense of that everything is so fascist and that you can't, you know, break the rules. And then whenever people do break the rules, people in power freak out so bad and are like, this can never happen again. We have to pretend this never happened. And so I think kind of a lot of LA history does become kind of like folk history and just like passed on oral tradition kind of stuff where, you know, if you don't know somebody who was there, you might have no idea what happened. And, you know, I think to all the people I really like, all the LA writers, especially Mike Davis, I think kind of excavate that history and, you know, are able to show you a neighborhood and say, here's what happened here actually. There's no sign that this happened here. There's no evidence that anything happened, but people who were here remember it. And if you write it down, then it can be passed on. And so with the Heidi Fleiss story, you know, which happened when I was a kid and made a big impression on me here, I think I was kind of shocked to find out it was such a big story at the time that like it had kind of faded out of memory, that people who were a little bit younger than me had just never heard it because it kind of hadn't been repeated as much as some of the other stories. You know, I think when the O.J. Simpson scandal came back up and got a lot of sort of reevaluation and looking at like the effect it had on LA, I thought, you know, oh, well, Heidi Fleiss, that story happened at the same time. And I saw both of those cases, these big public trials, as being sort of like they were referendums on the riots, which had just happened a couple years before. But they were also this attempt to kind of erase the riots out of existence and to say like, okay, the LAPD's in charge now. Everything's fine. The LAPD is like cracking down on crime and the cleaning up the city. And the fact that with both the O.J. Simpson trial and the Heidi Fleiss trial, it was like the people of Los Angeles rejected that. They said, no, we still hate the LAPD. We're not going to like side with the LAPD on this because we like see through what they're trying to do, which is to propagandize Los Angeles, you know? And so I think LA is like, it's controlled by a very small group of people with a lot of money and power. And then there's everybody else. And the fact that everybody else has collective power as a group is something they really don't want people to know. They really want people to forget about. And so, you know, I think the Joan Didion take on the 60s, which is that it ended with the Manson family murders, is like it's overly tidy. And it's also kind of what the powers that be wanted to happen, was to be like, okay, the 60s are over now. We are done asking questions. And you know, Joan Didion's kind of a doomer about that stuff. She's kind of like, yeah, you know, revolutionary stuff is she just doesn't care, I think, too. It's like, she's not interested in free love. She's not interested in experimentation in the same way. She's very trad and very conservative in a lot of ways. And Eve Babbitt's is the opposite. Eve Babbitt's is like, she does get a lot of history in there and a lot of sort of, you know, folk history about LA and about, you know, things that happen that only locals know. And yeah, to record it, because, you know, I think it's like the 60s were sort of forced to a close, not because they naturally were going to come crashing down, but because everybody in charge was like, this cannot happen. We cannot have this. We cannot have people asking questions about power and race and class and everything in LA that's so completely fucked up. You know, and so Mike Davis says it wasn't the Manson family murders that ended the 60s. It was the government killing the LA Black Panthers and doing a psyop to sort of try and shut down the Black Panthers, especially in LA. And then to sort of, again, just like remake LA as this place where none of this stuff ever happened. You know, there's no plaque saying here's where the Black Panthers were assassinated. You know, they really just want you to forget. And I think that inability to deal with institutional memory is why things just happen over and over again. Because it's like every time there's an uprising, it's always about the same issues. It's always about segregation and class and racism in LA, but they never deal with any of that afterwards. You know, it's always just, okay, you know, forget about this. Here's a community event or something, you know, paid for by the city. Nobody asked for rent relief or, you know, food or anything that people actually need.
Yeah. I went to Echo Park this weekend for the first time in a year. And I like was living in Echo Park right by the park this time last year when all the or like, you know, almost a year ago when all the protests happened there and they kicked everyone out of the park. and like the fence is still there. The vendors are still on the outside of the park, and it's like, my friend was like, let's go in, and I was like literally like it was like tense, and I like walking in, and I was like, I hate it here. It's like so fucking fake to like present this park without, like, the fence is still there, but like if you didn't know what was happening, like you would just think it's an idyllic park, but like they're keeping people out still, and it's like
For sure. And you'd
still
be
the
like,
same
why
thing.
is there a fence around it? And there would be no
You're not like-
explanation
you're
unless
like-
you talk to somebody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think that's all continues to be very true. And I think as somebody who, I've been in LA for about 3 years now, and just like trying to wrap my head around the history of this city has been like, I was like, maybe I just gotta spend more, it's gonna be more time, but like with every little like aspect of it, like if I think about like the LA River, or like just any little thing of like how it became what it is, I get like so fascinated with like
it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's
Like,
an
it's-
overwhelming
yeah.
city to like kind of move into and then have to process like what exactly it is.
Yeah.
And it's also like, it reminds me a lot of Chicago in the way where there are like, you know, LA doesn't, to me, I don't know, and I've lived here not even a year, so, but to me, there's not like an LA culture, but it's like there are so many different things going on. And I forgot where I was going with that, but
No, I completely agree with you. It's like, it's not a monoculture.
Yeah.
And so that, I think some people can't handle that because they're like, well, what's the culture? And it's like, well, it's all these different things, and it's all these different neighborhoods, and they're in conversation with each other, but it's not, you know, it's not all oriented around one central part of anything.
Which is
Yeah.
hard for people to like, I think, understand.
Conceptualize, yeah.
Mhm.
I was wondering too, because, you know, this, like, there is kind of a newly found Eve Babbitt's is now like newly kind of very popular, at least from like a bookseller's perspective. And I was kind of wondering what your take on that is in terms of like, what is it that people are drawn to her? Like, why are people drawn to her in such a really intense way after so long?
Yeah, I mean, I think just finding out that she existed, and that, you know, there's this body of work, and that things can just fall out of print, and that, you know, sort of what becomes the institutional approved things are, you know, chosen by a few people. But I think what really resonates with people in LA about Eve Babbitt's is that she loves LA, and she has positive things to say about it, in addition to critical things, but she comes at it from a different angle than most of the sort of famous LA literary works, which tend to be written by transplants and tend to be about how, you know, it'll steal your soul, which you know, isn't not true. Like all the East Coast transplants who came out here and then like drank themselves to death, you know, trying to make it in Hollywood, like that's for sure one aspect of Los Angeles that doesn't not exist, you know?
Did you know we read Raymond Chandler before this book?
Well, Raymond Chandler, I think, also loves LA. I think Raymond Chandler also has, you know, he's not just being snotty about like, oh, it's different. It's like he has a real feel for what makes it interesting and different. And I think, you know, and some of my favorite books about LA are about what a hellhole it is. You know, I love another thing the New York Review of Books brought back into print is Dorothy B. Hughes' In a Lonely Place,
Yeah.
which is like an incredible LA book that's completely about how unbelievably alienating Los Angeles can be. It's about sort of like the existential despair, which I think is just what you get a lot of with things like that, and with like Day of the Locust by Nathaniel West and Ask the Dust by John Fante, you know. But I love the things that are sort of more about like, I mean, I love all those things too, but it's like I also feel like there are some writers who write about LA from kind of an insider's perspective, and Eve is definitely one of them. And that is what is so great about her. But I think Raymond Chandler too. I think Walter Mosley. I think a lot of sort of the noir writers use it as this. It's a great way to write about LA because it's like detective novels are about driving around everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And so they all work as these great travelogues because it's like, oh, well, now I have to go to this part of town and describe it, you know? And I love that.
Yeah. Eve Babbitt has like a really great way of, like you can tell that she loves LA, but not in kind of a boring way, you know? She really loves like the whole experience of it.
Yeah, not in like a boosterism way and not in like, oh, you know, glamorous Hollywood. It's like she likes what I like about it, which is the sort of the contrast between the kind of false glamour and the actual kind of scrappiness of everything. LA is like a very scrappy place, and it is a place for self-motivated people. I think if you get your identity from being in a crowd and being in a group, then like LA might not be for you, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think it's probably comforting for people having that experience to read something like Day of the Locust and be like, see, this is what it's like. This is why I'm so unhappy. It's because it does this to everybody, you know? But I do think it's also like transplants come here with their own fantasy, and to bring it back to the sort of feminized landscape, it's like people come here with this idea of like, I'm going to become this person, and then sometimes it doesn't happen and they blame LA. And it's like, well, maybe it's not LA's fault, you know? Maybe it's because you know, to quote the Raymond Pettibon piece, like, you know, I thought California would be different. It's like, well, that's on you. If you thought you were going to completely reinvent yourself just because you moved to a different place, then like, you know, wherever you go, there you are. You're there's no geographical solution to an emotional problem, as they say.
Yeah.
So I think if you're somebody who has a strong sense of yourself and does know who you are, then LA is a great place. And so, yeah, again, I think some of the writers that really get brought up in conjunction with LA tend to be these dudes, you know, Bukowski and people too, that are just like, I come to fuck and drink and, you know, which again is like fine. I like making fun of Bukowski, but like, you know, I don't hate it because it's not just the only thing to me, you know, but I think people like Oscar Zeta Acosta I bring up a lot, who wrote about East LA. And
our next book we're reading.
Oh, he's the best. Yeah. You know, I think there's this kind of alternate canon of LA writers that has been building, especially in recent years, to kind of replace the traditional canon that's all just like, you know, Fitzgerald and Last Tycoon and stuff like that. All of, you know, all of the books that are about people moving to LA for their kind of last chance. With stuff that's like about how LA is a vibrant place, about how it isn't just a soul-sucking, you know, mistress, but also what a great soul-sucking mistress it is, you know? Nowhere else I'd rather have my soul be sucked out, except maybe Las Vegas, which I also think is like, should be the capital of America.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, do you have any closing questions, Alena?
I don't think I do. I had one, but it's gone from me now.
As they go.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for having me on. I think Heidi World has really been my attempt to kind of synthesize all these kinds of LA literary traditions with podcasting, which was that I wanted to read a book about the Heidi Fleiss story that was all encompassing, and there wasn't one. So I was like, I can't believe no one's compiled all the materials from this into one big thing. I'm going to do it and basically write a book about LA, but just do it as a podcast, you know, so that I can be your tour guide.
That's so exciting.
But yeah, I was thinking a lot about things like Inherent Vice and Vineland, the Thomas Pynchon books, which are both these kind of big sprawling, and I think Pynchon is the greatest East Coast transplant California writer, because he completely understands. He sees how weird it is and he loves it. You know, it's like he understands that it's completely weird and completely different from where he came from, and instead of being like horrified and uptight about it, he's like the person who fully just embraced, like, this is such a weird place. The intersection of all the like aerodynamic industry and the weird culty spiritualism and weird health food people, you know, sort of all of the new strains of America, the most recent cultural developments are here, because it's like the end of America.
Yeah,
the bleeding edge.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So by the time this is going to come out in June, so by then everyone will be able to go check out Heidi World in full. It should by the time this episode comes out, and so hopefully people can just dive right into another great LA story.
Yeah, check it out. And if you love weird LA ephemera, which I definitely do, you will enjoy it. And I think, also kind of reclaiming the narratives of party girls as being historical documents, you know, especially just like what do powerful men leave on the cutting room floor that they don't want people to know is happening, you know. Yeah. Especially prostitution. So, you know, to look at it from a pro-sex work angle was really important to me, because I thought that was, you know, LA should be a place where we kind of examine and demolish old hypocrisies, because, like, why not? We should be asking questions always. Why do people live the way they do and follow certain rules and not others, and, you know, remember certain historical events but not others? It's because the hypocrisy of the people in charge here are always being put into stark relief constantly, and they do not want people to know that, which is also why I'm hating on the hating-ass LA Times a lot in this podcast, because they have a long history of being sort of a mouthpiece for the cops and not a real newspaper. So yeah, I think a people's history of Los Angeles is the way to learn about Los Angeles.
I love that. Yeah. And you're saying yes. Well, thank you so much, Molly. And everyone, you can tune in for our next episode for us to talk about Revenge of the Cockroach People by Oscar Acosta. We're really excited to get into that as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylightbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.